politicians, compelled only to preserve their own power and spin convoluted webs of lies, designed to keep their people committed to a long-abandoned cause. If there was one thing liberals and conservatives in mainstream politics were right about, it was that these societies were morally abhorrent, and a defense of them was a defense of rigid authoritarianism, upheld at the cost of millions of lives. Today, what is understood to be the left is fractured into numerous subgroups, none of which seem to agree with each other on much of anything other than the fact that unrestrained capitalism is bad. One can be a leftist if they are advocating for something akin to a social democracy, a more empathetic, more socially oriented form of a capitalist economy that focuses on public welfare. Similarly, one can be a leftist if they literally run apologetics for the now-defunct Soviet Union. Most of us would agree, all else being equal, that one of these individuals is likely going to come off as more pragmatic, and arguably more sane, than the other. After all, for all the wrongdoings of the United States government, defending the wrongdoings of other imperialist nations by comparing them to the history of American imperialism is to imply that evils can be justified by other evils. Unless one is to suggest that all of the Soviet Union's brutally totalitarian actions were simply forced responses to American aggression, a notion that is as dishonest as it is ahistorical, one must concede by all accounts the USSR should be broadly viewed as an example of ideology being used as a crutch for malevolence and power. Online, content creators such as Bay Area Marxist-Leninist, Infrared, and others continue to promote Marxism-Leninism as the only legitimate response to capitalism, with all other takes on Marx's ideas being perceived as unworkable at best, deliberate attempts at disinformation by the CIA at worst. From Eastern Europe to Maoist China to Cambodia under Pol Pot and Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, the application of Marxism-Leninism has consistently led to brutal atrocities and flagrant violations of international law and human rights. This is not something that is confined to history textbooks. Modern China, which still incorporates elements of Marxist-Leninist and Maoist thought, is likely engaged in a campaign of ethnic cleansing against Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang province, something no doubt justified through the perceived threat Uyghurs pose to the state and the party, and something that draws unfortunate parallels to the treatment of Muslims in the United States following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Running apologetics for these regimes does two things, both of which are highly toxic to the agenda of the left. First, it implies that the USSR, China, Cambodia, and similar nations are true realizations of leftism. And second, it forwards the notion that genocide and imperialism are excusable, so long as such efforts are undergone to oppose capitalism. Neither of these interpretations benefit the view of the left by the public. Noted scholar and political commentator Noam Chomsky is famous for viewing the Soviet Union as not only something other than a socialist nation, but considerably divorced from the conception of socialism Karl Marx conceived of in his writings. Despite the pushback from extremists on the left, Chomsky is correct. The USSR was never a socialist nation. Lenin conceded as much before he died, and under Stalin it became a grotesque perversion of the pro-worker agenda prominent leftists like Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, and Vladimir Lenin himself wrote about. Stalin upheld an authoritarian regime the likes of which had never been seen before, rivaled only in its brutality and total lack of empathy by Nazi Germany. As the Cold War with the United States and other NATO member states escalated, the quality of life experienced by the average Soviet citizen continued to deteriorate, and it became increasingly clear that global communism was on the decline. This is a major reason Marxism-Leninism is an impractical suggestion. Within the confines of global capitalist hegemony, there can be no truly socialist nation. Our efforts as leftists should not be hinged on failed revolutionary ideologies or authoritarian oppression, but rather efforts to bolster the rights of workers and marginalized groups within the current system, until such a time when global socialism becomes feasible. I have little doubt that Bay Area Marxist-Leninist, Infrared, and perhaps even other Marxist-Leninists will respond to this with aggression and outrage, perhaps implying that I am not truly a leftist if I'm willing to engage in what is called bourgeois politics, and forward pro-worker reforms within the capitalist system. The reality is that such individuals and the ideology they forward are politically impotent. Any leftist revolution that were to commence within the United States or a similar country will inevitably fail, resulting in mass casualties and perhaps a crackdown against quote-unquote countercultural ideologies in general. Similarly, the sort of government these individuals lobby for is one of rigid authoritarianism and totalitarianism, often coinciding with the oppression of ethnic minorities and political dissidents. Instead, The efforts of the left should prioritize reform and compassion, making the best of a system that we accept as flawed and exploitative, but one we must work within until a brighter tomorrow is realized. We cannot yet end the exploitation, but we can alleviate it to a considerable degree, and the best way to accomplish this is by moving the general public further to the left, something that can't be done if we make excuses for failed, unethical governments. It is commonly believed, with good reason, that any viable political system that elevates workers to the forefront of the political process and provides them with both personal autonomy and economic freedom is a system that would incorporate democracy. By their very nature, none of the regimes we've discussed today were democratic by any stretch of the imagination, nor did they allow for the existence of meaningful political debate or dissent. Apologetics aside, it becomes increasingly clear to a careful observer that any apologetics run for this reduce to whataboutism or fear-mongering, blaming the actions of the Soviets or the Chinese, for instance, on the looming CIA boogeyman rather than accepting the failures of central planning and cults of personality. Quoting the article on the dictatorship of the proletariat, quote, "The Bolsheviks became concerned that under these conditions, the absence of mass participation in political life and the banning of opposition parties, counter-revolutionary forces would express themselves within the Bolshevik party itself. Some evidence existed for this in the mass of ex-opposition party members who signed up for Bolshevik membership immediately after the end of the Civil War. Despite the principle of democratic centralism in the Bolshevik party, internal factions were banned. This was considered an extreme measure and did not fall within Marxist doctrine. The ban remained until the Soviet Union's dissolution in 1991. In 1921, vigorous internal debate and freedom of opinion were still present within Russia, and the beginnings of censorship and mass political repression had not yet emerged. The workers' opposition faction continued to operate despite being nominally dissolved. The debates of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union continued to be published until 1923. The article goes on to discuss the Soviet Union under Stalin, saying, quote, "Elements of the later censorship and attacks on political expression would appear during Lenin's illness and after his death, when members of the future Stalinist clique clamped down on party democracy among the Georgian Bolsheviks and began to censor material. Pravda ceased publishing the opinions of political oppositions after 1924, and at the same time the ruling clique admitted large numbers of new members into the party in order to shout down the voices of oppositionists at party meetings, severely curtailing internal debate. Their policies were partly directed by the interests of the new bureaucracy that had accumulated a great deal of social weight in the absence of an active participation in politics by the majority of people. By 1927, many supporters of the left opposition began to face political repression, and Leon Trotsky was exiled." If you identify with one of the ideologies that I've mentioned in this video today, I hope you understand that I'm not attacking you as a person or insinuating that you're a bad person. I'm merely offering an opinion on the ideology as a whole and insinuating that if the left has certain objectives, namely meaningful improvement of the quality of life of the working class, social progressivism, etc., these are the sorts of ideologies that we should try to avoid. That's not to say all of their ideas are completely useless. I think there's of course historical merit in understanding, say, Marxism-Leninism. It's just to say, given the current political climate and given what's achievable within the system, these are not things that we should be endorsing. And further, I think running apologetics for the abhorrent actions of these regimes throughout history only serves to worsen the image of the left to people that would otherwise be ingratiated into the left. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Even if you disagreed, I want your thoughts in the comments. I welcome open and fair discussions on this topic. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the New American Left channel. All your support greatly helps us out, as always. If you want to support the project directly, you can head to patreon.com/newamericanleft. Any and all support you give me over there is, of course, appreciated. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/newleftpress, where we post all of our spicy political and economic takes as they happen. Once again, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.